I want to bring in Director of Polling at the Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics, John Della Volpe, to talk more about this. Some really fascinating stuff there that I want to dig into, John, if we can. A lot of flip-flopping going on there, right? You have Biden gaining with older voters. You have Trump gaining with younger voters, some registered, some likely voters as well. You actually did your own polling between, I believe it was October 22nd and November 6th. Some of your findings were similar. That was 3 weeks or so into the Israel-Hamas war. Then, though, you found Joe Biden at 41%, Donald Trump at 30%. What I thought was fascinating, though, John, was that 15% of those that you polled said they would not vote if the matchup was between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Talk us through that.
That's right. I think the bad news around that is, yes, relative to where we were 4 years ago, there was less enthusiasm about voting generally. That's not a good thing. The good news is, in less than a year, 10 plus months or so, we know what we need to do to turn that around in terms of talking about civics and the importance of three things to young people. First of all, democracy can and has worked, one. Second is government can do big things. And I think there's a lot more of the Biden track record over the last several years that has not been communicated to a place where younger people understand the over $100 billion in student debt relief, as an example, the most significant investment in climate, et cetera, could go on. And the third thing is there is a distinct difference between the two parties. Those are the three elements that I think, Yasmin, need to be in the consciousness of younger people to even have a conversation about them voting at the levels at which they voted the last several election cycles.
Let me read for you from the Washington Post about some reporting that's happening from inside the White House when it comes to the president's happiness or lack thereof with some of his polling numbers. Biden delivered some stern words for the small group assembled. His poll numbers were unacceptably low, and he wanted to know what his team and his campaign were doing about it. Obviously, we know Israel-Hamas war is one of the top issues for young voters right now. If you're speaking to the Biden administration, if you're speaking to his campaign team, what do you tell them about how to raise these poll numbers, especially when it comes to young voters?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is there's a recognition that all of us should understand is that President Biden is not in the White House today, if not for what Steve Kornacki said just a couple of moments ago. Younger people under 30 voted for him by a plus 20-point margin in each one of those battleground states last cycle. He lost the votes of everybody over the age of 45. So one, they are just essential to kind of communicate and mobilize. One. The second thing is, I think President Biden has done his job in many ways. He has created, he's followed up on the campaign promises made in 2020, bipartisan gun violence prevention legislation, climate, student debt. The question is, how is it being communicated? Is it being communicated? And we know in this era, bad news is much stickier than good news right now. So I think we need to have a complete conversation about basically resetting communications. You know, younger people spend time on YouTube. They're watching on Netflix, on HBO Max, et cetera. They're watching The Bear. They're watching Hard Knocks. They're seeing kind of a transparent, visceral series of shows that you can understand the emotions behind it, get behind the characters, see how that, quote, sausage is being made. And I think thinking about ideas like that, short series leading up to the State of the Union, looking at behind the scenes, seeing the vitality that exists within the administration, the role that people beyond just the president have in charting this country. It's just one step that I think younger people would appreciate in terms of being communicated in ways that beyond the 30-second ads and even social media ads and influencers, showing behind the scenes what's happening, because I think it's a better story than most people appreciate.
What about abortion and reproductive rights? We saw what happened in the midterm elections, right? Abortion won out in the midterm elections, number one issue coming out of the exit polling. We see on every state ballot, right? It drives people to the polls. But when you're looking at this New York Times Santa College poll that just came out, less than 1% saying abortion is one of the top issues that they're going to be voting on. I want to play for you some sound of Vice President Kamala Harris speaking to our own Lawrence O'Donnell about that very issue. She believes it should be number one on the ballot.
This is an issue that, yes, I do believe will be resolved in November of next year, because I do know that the American people fight for freedom and believe in the woman's right to make decisions about her own body. But understand, every day until then, there are women suffering in our country in horrible ways. And look, let me tell you, there's going to be a split screen on this, too, in November of 24, to your point about the election. There's really going to be, of all the issues we've discussed so far, none of them are binary. This one is. November of 24, binary. On the one hand, you're going to have the folks who are standing, such as President Joe Biden and me, saying we trust women to be able to make a decision about what is in their best interest, and women can trust us to protect their fundamental freedoms. And on the other hand, you're going to have folks who want a national ban and have the gall to tell women who are even the survivors of rape or incest that they don't have the right to make decisions about what happens to their body next. So I think there's going to be a clear choice on this issue and so many others next year in November.
John, do they focus on the results and what they believe is in the best interest of women and ignore the polls here?
Well, listen, Vice President clearly knows what she's talking about. She just wrapped up a series of college visits talking to younger people. And I think abortion rights incredibly important, and that's wrapped around kind of a larger frame, I think, of personal freedoms. But the other thing to note about this poll is we need to be careful in terms of how much interpretation we can make from one question. The question is, what's the largest problem, biggest problem in America today?
Right.
Even among younger people, abortion was 1%. Foreign policy was 6%, i.e. Israel and Hamas. So that's just a sense of where young voters' minds are today. But we need to go much, much deeper than one question if we really want to understand the importance of abortion rights and losing 50 years of freedoms.